Good evening and welcome. My name is Tria Raimondo, and I'm the Director of Global Development Programs here at the Council on Global Affairs. It's my pleasure to welcome you this evening to our panel discussion, Check the Labels, Brands as Sustainability Ambassadors. Tonight's program is part of our Women in Global Development Forum. Thank you to our sponsors for your continued support of this series. Lead sponsors, Horizon Pharma and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois. Our patron sponsors, the Frankel Family Foundation, Whole Foods Trust, Kirkland and Ellis, Ashley and Avery McCall, Susan and Bob Morrison, and the Zakat Foundation of America. A quick reminder for our in-person and digital audiences that the Council is an independent and nonpartisan platform. Views expressed by individuals we host are their own and do not represent institutional positions or views of the Council. Please silence your phones, but not your voices. Our event is on the record, we are live streaming, and we will welcome your social media engagement. As global pressures like climate change threaten our planet and demands for supply chain transparency and improved human rights grow, consumers are shifting their attention and loyalty to companies and organizations that align with their beliefs. In fact, in an informal polling of an education initiative and nonprofit organization focused on sustainable literacy. She's a longtime advocate for peace, equality, and human rights. And our moderator today is Christina Alessi, a business and politics correspondent at CNN. Her reporting focuses on the Trump administration's trade and tax policy impact on Americans, big business, and Wall Street. She has a history of reporting on government ethics, political conflicts of interest, and big business deals.
And as it becomes more popular, it almost loses meaning. I mean, a lot of people just consider it protecting the environment, but it's so much bigger than that. How do you guys define it for yourselves and for your organizations?
Okay, I think sustainability is really a must-have. It has to be part of your corporate strategy, embedded into everything you do. My role at Edelman was a brand new role 9 years ago where we did not have a sustainability function. And at that point in time, it became more and more clear from stakeholders and expectations and everything that was happening that sustainability has to be embedded into everything you do. And it's also been part of the core values of Edelman because it's something that my father always did when he set up the firm in 1952. It was always giving back, but it's become much broader and it touches every part of a business, which was a big awakening for me because, like you said, I initially thought it was just environmental and community involvement, but it also touches human resources and procurement and supply chain, so it's very holistic and should be integrated into everything you do at a company.
Well, I always begin by asking, what are we trying to sustain? Because today, the way that we are going, we need 1.7 Earth to sustain the kind of production, manufacturing, and business as usual. So when we are talking about sustainability, what is it that we are trying to sustain, and how can we actually slow down to effectively sustain our life on this planet? And again, I would like to echo what you are saying. It's very holistic. It's part of a culture. I think sustainability is a culture, and we have to define what is the culture of sustainability today.
Yeah, I think to build off of that, I think that's a great kind of reference to the Brundtland definition, which is really about using resources today in a way that doesn't impact future generations' use of resources. And similarly at Etsy, we think about it that way as well. We're really focused on 3 core areas of impact: economic, social, and environmental. Economic impact is the core of our business. It's how we empower more than 2 million sellers to run creative businesses through our website. Social is really diversity and inclusion of our workforce and of the marketplace overall. And environmental sustainability is the carbon footprint and the waste footprint of our operations.
So I'm just going to get straight to it because you guys study brands, you live and breathe them, you look at them for competitive reasons, you look at them for inspiration. What are the brands that are doing an amazing job at being sustainable, and which brands need to work at it? Would you say? I mean, I could start naming companies, but I'm interested.
A role model for me is Patagonia. They're doing wonderful things. They're not afraid to take political stances on important issues. their focus on the supply chain and the impact that the production of their clothing has. I think that Etsy is doing a really good job. We're leading in a lot of ways.
Sorry, I should have said except for your own company.
What companies aren't doing great? I don't know. I wouldn't want to work in the oil industry today, personally.
Yeah, but that's an obvious one, right?
Sure.
I mean, the fashion industry is the number two polluter, and they don't get the same public disdain as the. Name a company that you think could be doing a better job that you read about, and you're like, they could be doing it, but they could be setting the tone for more, for a more sustainable supply chain. All it takes is one big mover, like Apple or McDonald's or someone like that, to really change the game, right?
I think, J. Crew, Madewell have done incredible work in the past year by partnering with fair trade and by making their factories fair trade. And the denim that they are making is also a denim that's very, very much more sustainable than other companies are looking into manufacturing. And I really think that the brands of the future that are going to be standing out are actually factories that are stepping more and more up front and becoming brands themselves. We work very closely with a lot of solution providers and factories that have become a lot more recognized on a consumer-facing level, if you want, and they are becoming brands as well, and they are being the reasons why the more traditional brand like J. Crew or Gap or Old Navy or Patagonia, for instance, are making the decisions to work with these factories.
John?
Well, I would say that obviously the brands are very important, and one that's done an outstanding job is Unilever, in that they're what's been a client of it. Basically, they're involved.
I was going to say it's got to be a client of yours.
Well, I mean, but it's but what they've done in terms of committing to higher profitable, purposeful programs, but also minimizing the resources impact. But it's also, brands have to sort of be aware of the change we do in our brand study every year. And one of the very interesting things that we've learned from the brand study is that 64% of buyers out there are belief-driven buyers, which means that they will choose to take action on an issue, on a brand, buy it, boycott it, or avoid it if they do not take action on societal issues. And the other interesting part of that brand study is that it's across all ages and all demographics and all incomes. So that's
not just millennials.
It's not just millennials, it's everybody. So there's a great expectation for brands to take action on these societal issues, and it's driven by consumers, but it's also driven by stakeholders as well as employees. It's an expectation from employees that you're taking action on these societal issues. So it's a very integrated expectation, and this high stakeholder expectations for brands to take stands on these issues.
Definitely going to get back to data and research, because I do think that's an important part of the puzzle here. But let me rephrase the question now about what brands could be doing better, because none of you want to answer that question. What brand do you think could have the most impact on an environmental, social, political issue if they were to change or to, like I said, rejigger the supply, like order from a different parts supplier or something like that?
I think the key to sustainability is access. So the bigger the brand, the more accessible the brand, the bigger its impact. Small brands, medium-sized companies are doing incredible work. The luxury industry is taking a lot of steps towards sustainability, in fact, but their impact is not as large as if Gap or H&M would
Right.
were to take those same
Or Zara,
steps,
or
Zara, for instance. A simple step as a take-back program on. I know some of them are doing it, like Uniqlo is doing it, H&M is doing it, but it's not as effective as Eileen Fisher, for example. Eileen Fisher has a take-back program that's cutting edge in terms of system, what she's designed around it, how her consumers are being loyal in returning the garments, getting $5 back, but then continuing this kind of relationship with the brands. I don't think that H&M and Uniqlo have yet designed a proper system to taking back their clothes, and I think that's key in creating a positive impact. But another thing I would like to say is that brands are afraid of the word sustainability. Most of the time that when we work with them, they're like, oh, don't say that we're sustainable. They're very much afraid of greenwashing. And so we had to use other words to be able to engage and encourage them to taking steps, because sometimes even taking one small step, they're not going to be able to communicate it, for instance.
What just for the audience, what is greenwashing? Can you explain that?
So greenwashing is the act of using marketing in order to sell an item that we are advertising it as sustainable, when in fact it's not completely sustainable.
Right. And it's funny that you said that, because I was actually listening to a podcast the other day. It was an interview with the founder of Allbirds, the co-founder of Allbirds, and he was saying, we don't market ourselves as sustainable, even though they came up with like one of the most sustainable materials for sneakers.
That's right.
Because there is always more to be done, and consumers don't buy based on sustainability as the main feature. I mean, there is truth in that, right? Like, we are talking about how to make brands attractive to consumers because of sustainability, but is there a danger that, you know, well, you're accused of greenwashing? Or?
I mean, I'm not accused of.
No, I'm saying, but like
some brands are afraid of it. They're afraid of it. But apps like Good On You, for instance, if you are not familiar with Good On You, it's an app that shows you which brands are doing sustainable work, and they've designed a way to measure sustainability. I think that it's just a matter. I do think that consumers are looking for sustainable products. They're actively looking for sustainable products. It's a matter of how are we communicating our efforts. And again, to go back to the example of Patagonia, Patagonia says all the time we're not sustainable. They say it all the time, but here's what we're doing that's positive. And I think this approach is a great example in approaching sustainability, because the best way to be sustainable is not to produce anymore. But if you are going to be producing, let's produce responsibly. And we use the word responsible very much when we work with brands.
Now, I'd love to get your thoughts on why it is that big companies, you mentioned H&M and Zara, and I don't want to pick on them, but there are a lot of big companies who have problems, implementing those programs that would make them greener, better, more conscious, that kind of thing. Why are the medium-sized companies better at it? And I'm generalizing here, but because there are some big companies who are great at it, but why are the medium companies more successful at it, or at least appear to be more successful at it?
Yeah, I can take a shot at that. I think it's really difficult when it comes down to it to actually integrate sustainability throughout your company, throughout your operations. Means lofty goals. It means influencing at the executive level. It means training employees. It means equipping people with resources to make responsible decisions. It means building out systems, processes, tools. It's a lot of work, and it takes sophistication and knowledge, and this stuff is new, right? And so you see small and medium-sized companies more successful at it for a couple of reasons. One, they tend to have younger, more recently out of school populations who are actually learning about these things and don't see the world through a bureaucratic, systemic, impossible to solve lens, and they're building it from the ground up sustainably. We were talking about this just before we got on. It's a lot easier to build sustainable operations from the start when you're building operations to begin with than to retrofit sustainability into your existing operations.
I would disagree with that, because
Love it.
I think that it's the larger companies that are taking the actions, and it's the smaller, mid-sized companies that need to catch up. And I think what's driving the importance is the high stakeholder expectations, whether it's consumers, such as the Earned Brand study, or legislative directives, or investors. One of the big things, as I said, my role was brand new, and over the course of the 9 years, there was always the question, how is sustainability really important? And it grew and evolved because employees asked for it. But when the investor and Larry Fink of BlackRock says it's equally important for they're going to invest their funds in companies that are focused on taking action on societal issues as well as their fiduciary responsibility, and it's also the NGOs, it's also the employees. Or from our side, as a professional services firm, a lot of the clients are requiring you to submit to third-party questionnaires and participate in CDP. So I'd say that it's the multinationals that are more engaged and leading the way, and it's important to try to catch up the small and medium size, because if there's ever a change to be made, it has to be made across the whole spectrum of companies, whether you're large or small. And 70% of new jobs are created by small to medium enterprises, so it's an important collaboration and capacity building. So I would say that it's a real expectation, and the trust barometer itself, which has been around for 19 years, pointed that it's even more of an expectation of my own employer to take action on societal issues. We do the trust barometer. It's 33,000 respondents into 27 countries, measuring trust, business, government, media and NGOs. But it points to the fact that there's a wide open opportunity for companies and for employers to take action on these societal issues. And 75%, expect that's what that both of the informed and the general public expect my employer to take action on these issues. So it's being driven by the stakeholders, and I think it's some of the small and medium-sized companies are obviously doing it, but I think to balance it out, it has to be a collective effort across all size companies.
It definitely has to be a collective effort. And you brought up a good point about employees really pushing for change. I mean, how often do you speak to employees who are like, we need to be more sustainable, and how is that driving results? Because I feel like even more than consumers, sometimes it's the internal complaints that actually make the change.
Yeah, so having responsibility for sustainability and our impact work broadly, I love that employees care about this. It makes my job easier. We have monthly all hands, and every few weeks we have Q&A with our executive team, and we are a very transparent culture. And fresh out of college, undergrad, junior engineer has no problem at all standing up to the CEO and asking questions and demanding improved performance. And I love when that happens. I'm always eager to engage with our employees on sustainability issues. So it's certainly driven by employees, but it's also driven by consumers, by investors, by risk, by the business case generally.
In the case of Eileen Fisher, for instance, they have started 20 years ago, and it has started by employees saying, hey, we need to do better. We need to do better at this. I think it's a long-term and if not a continuous effort to become sustainable or to be sustainable. In the case of a smaller company like Mara Hoffman, it's just been 6 years ago when it came from herself, and then her employees that did not align with her left the company, and she was able to hire new employees that were more aligned with the goals that she had set for her company. In every single company that Slow Factory works with, we always have champions like insiders, that can help us communicate to the decision makers effectively, and it's oftentimes the employees that are championing these kinds of changes internally.
So you brought up, I just want to switch gears for a little bit, because you brought up research and data, and as a reporter, anytime somebody throws a statistic at me these days, I just automatically cringe, because you can manipulate numbers and cherry pick them and whatnot. I guess I'm curious, is there any hard data? We know that consumers want to buy brands they can feel good about, but do we know how much they're willing to put behind that? Like actually how many sustainable brands they buy versus how many non-sustainable brands they buy? Like, is there any data to show they're actually purchasing on those values?
I would go back to the fact that consumers they expect, for our earned brand study to take action. Or the other point of that data was that 64% also say they will talk against and not buy if you're not taking societal action. I don't have any hard correlation about taking action and the brand sort of piece, but the reality, according to is the fact that
if there's a perception that you're not sustainable, then that can turn you off from buying
action.
it.
They will choose not to buy if you're not taking action on societal issues. That's a huge awareness, important fact also.
We recently announced a major new program, which is first of its kind in the e-commerce industry to balance the emissions from shipping packages around the world with carbon offsets. And we were super excited to be leading the charge on this and use some of Edelman's research to make the business case that consumers will respond accordingly. And I think something I'm really excited to share, it was talked about on our earnings call just last week. We've run tests. We put language about this program in front of consumers and saw an actual increase in conversion, increased likelihood to shop when
Conversion
they
means
have that.
they make the buy.
Yes, yeah.
And what kind of information did you put in front of them? Like
basic information at checkout that we fully offset the impact of our shipping emissions.
Oh, it's just a disclaimer.
Yep, not a disclaimer, a part of our brand, an advertisement, frankly.
Okay.
It's information. It's to help them make a conscious decision about whether they want to purchase or not.
And that's across the board for all products, or is it some products?
It's on all checkout pages on Etsy.com. If you go in now, go to purchase something, you'll see at the bottom of the
Go buy something on
checkout
Etsy,
page.
basically.
If you want to find out about our carbon neutral shipping.
One great example that's happened, it happened in the past past year or so was the Nike example, where they believe in something, when they came out in support of Colin Kaepernick, and they did a large advertisement about it, and they supported what he was trying to do, and there was a direct correlation of sales for them taking a 31% increase in sales, for them taking action on a societal issue when he was being left out there, when he took a stand on the issues, and he kneeled at the NFL games, and so that was a tangible example where of a company taking a stand on an issue and resulting in some sales.
Your eyes were narrowing, so I knew you were thinking on that one.
Me?
Yeah.
Because we're talking about activism. No, I just wanted to say Adidas is the brand that's been the most searched on Google in the past months. Maybe it's because of Beyonce working with them, but I would like to think it's because of their sustainability efforts. Because
it's probably Beyonce. But
no. It's because the research, when they started looking at when Adidas started to trend, was when they launched the first fully recyclable running shoe. I don't know if you've looked into this. They just launched a running shoe that can be constantly recycled, and the way that they've engineered it is, there's like a lot of intricacies around it, like no glue. The plastic that they're using for the sole is recyclable and comes from plastic bottles. The whole thing. And they've launched it, and then they announced the Beyonce collaboration.
Okay,
so I don't know.
Maybe there's something to recycling then.
Their efforts are being very much, out there in terms of efforts around sustainability, and I really think that consumers are responding a lot more to any kind of effort that brands are making.
I want to go back to the social and political stands, because part of sustainability is also, as companies. Corporate America has sort of taken a different position in modern culture, right? We used to have institutions like churches and religion and whatnot. Now people feel a certain affinity or like part of a group of people who go to a certain gym or wear a certain shoe, or, brands have taken on almost the place of religion in some cases. You're part of something. You're part of a thing. Do brands have a increased responsibility to speak out against injustice or, a policy that's hurting, a government policy that's hurting people. I covered very closely North Carolina's bathroom bill and how companies in that state really protested the state legislature and ended up changing the law because they were pulling their headquarters out of the state. So, can you talk a little bit about how you think the role of the corporation has changed and whether or not it has a higher moral obligation to speak out?
I coined the term fashion activism, in 2012. And when I first started talking about the relationship between fashion and activism, people were like, there's no relationship. Fashion is frivolous, fashion is fun. Brands around fashion have no responsibility in engaging in activism. Fast forward a few years later, in 2016, I was on a panel and I was sitting with a lot of activist brands. Suddenly, everyone was taking a stand. And I think that brands, the word fashion activism, the concept around it is that fashion creates culture and culture can create action. And as you were saying, the brands create culture, or you made the comparison with religion, belonging, being a part of something. It's a cultural thing as well. Fashion creates culture and culture creates action. And as you were reporting, yes, brands can move the needles faster than citizens alone can, So for the question of responsibility of sustainability, when brands are saying we are going to pass no plastic, initiatives in our companies, they are making a huge impact, when larger brands like H&M are saying we are going to be supporting an orange-based fiber, like they were doing recently, like an orange waste to fiber production. They were able to not only invest in this startup, but also create such a massive impact on their and on moving the needle in culture. As I said in the beginning, sustainability is a culture. Unless we all participate in it, it also won't change on its own.
I asked that question because a lot of people in response to that would say, no, the role of business and corporation is to create profit and value and innovation and jobs and it shouldn't drive the cultural conversation. Like, it's actually a really heated debate on whether or not. And I deal with companies who lean totally into the debate and others who will not engage at all, even if their leadership, their CEO, their employees are opposed to a particular government policy or a stance or a cultural issue. They will not go for it publicly.
I would suggest that there's an expectation for brands to take action, whether through a purpose integration or a culture or an activism integration. But if the brands aren't willing to take a stand, the employees are going to drive them to it. The example of the Amazon, 6,700 employees writing a letter that they would like them to be more proactive on a climate, strategy. That's a huge change, in terms of the employee activism. So I would say that there's an expectation for brands to do it, but if they're not willing to do it, the employees are going to take action, or the Uber, Lyft walkout right before the IPO. So it's important for brands to take stands, or employees are going to drive you to take stands, or the other stakeholders, whether it's legislative or otherwise, because just a small example, like one of the major disclosure requirements is the Principle for Responsible Investors, and anybody who's a signatory to that agreement, if you're a signatory, it's required you're going to disclose your climate disclosure using the Task Force Greenhouse Protocol, or else you can't say you're a PRI signatory anymore. So that's, whether it's employees or investors or employees or consumers.
The pressure's coming.
The pressure's coming one way or the other.
You might as well dictate the terms and get in front of it.
It's always better to be proactive than reactive, because if you're reacting, then you're in more trouble. If you're proactive and you're building incrementally, you can build, but it's much harder to catch up after it's gone beyond what you're doing currently.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is, and this really comes down to whether companies view their stakeholders beyond their investors, right? So if they're concerned about their customers, their employees, the communities that they exist within, then yeah, they should be willing to take stand on issues that are important to those stakeholders.
Celine, you brought up this app. I wrote it down. Good on you. But that requires someone to know about the app, someone to download it on their phone. I mean, how do I, as a consumer, know Adidas is more sustainable than Nike? Like, shouldn't there be some kind of rating system? That everyone has to, that we're all speaking the same language, we're all looking at the same numbers, we're all using the same scale. Why hasn't, why haven't we gotten there yet, given the fact that, we're at the brink in terms of climate change, especially we're at a crisis point.
Where to start?
I know it's a big question.
No, but it's something I'm deeply passionate about. In fact, I run a non-for-profit and a sustainability literacy project called the Library Study Hall, or more, everyone knows it as Study Hall. Study Hall is an open, free conference series that's in partnership with the United Nations, and its one and only goal is to educate both consumers and the industry in sustainability literacy, both on what to buy, what not to buy, and how do we measure, what are the certifications out there, what are the tools, the data out there. We bring in people that are working in supply chain, that are tracing supply chain. We bring in people that are working in material innovation. Sometimes we bring in even scientists who are working in space innovation and space pollution. It's very much, out of the box. We work with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and we also partner with the Conscious Fashion Campaign, which is, if you are curious and you are interested in all this, you can follow. Of course, you can follow the Sew Factory, but you can also follow the Conscious Fashion Campaign. That's a project that was incubated, kind of started at the United Nations, and Carrie Bannigan, who is championing this project, is using the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals as an indicator for consumer facing when they are purchasing something. And she's piloting this project in trade shows. And in fact, it has been seen, like she has a lot of data on this small little pilot on how consumers are reacting. And she is onboarding buyers and educating buyers into buying properly. Like, if we're not going to stop buying anytime soon, so why not buy more responsibly,
right,
so that we can offer consumers more responsible options?
It's not the consumer's fault to a certain degree. I mean, you need to know, it needs to be clearly marked. Like, this has, this is causing this much pollution. How many units of pollution are you causing by buying this? I mean, that would have, I would think, a tremendous impact on behavior on the consumer side of things. But I guess the industry does not. I mean, it's a huge lift for business and government.
There's so much capacity in supply chain. We've tried to trace a lot of things. In fact, we work with SourceMap. If some companies here are interested, SourceMap is a tracing app, basically, that creates risk analysis, traces your supply chain for you. All the data is confidential. And even with that, there's a lot of opacity in the supply chain. Apparently, for each item of clothing, there are 100 hands that have touched it before it reaches you. So data is very complex, and the systems are very complex. At MIT Media Lab, my fellowship was mainly focused on certifications. I was very curious about how can we create something so that is consumer facing, that people can understand exactly what has happened. We looked at blockchain, we looked at so many things. The data was so complex and so opaque that we couldn't even communicate what was going on. It's not a yay or nay at all. So it's very complex.
Wow. John, Edelman, in that brand survey, the Earned Brand survey report that you guys did, you pointed out the fact that it's very important to make sure the consumer knows at point of purchase about, and I guess that's where your idea came from, exactly. Point of purchase, that the consumer knows what the brand's value is and how it's sustainable. Aside from Etsy, which is a great example, what are some other examples of companies that have really integrated the brand's value and sustainability and marketing that at the point of purchase?
That's a good question. I think, I mean, I don't have a specific, I can't have a specific example, but one
But
of.
do you have any ideas on, like what, some free advice maybe you can give the
Well,
audience
I mean,
without paying for it?
No, basically, I mean, I think it's very important for brands to sort of take action on the societal issues, and one of the, but also brands are working in conjunction with sectors. As an example, the Consumer Goods Forum, which is the association of all the consumer goods product, they're creating a whole sustainable supply chain benchmarking, to help guide collective action on the larger issues. And so sector by sector, people are working together. Another example, for a brand, REI, they did something which was very significant, on the Black Friday, after the Black Friday, which is, related to, when you're shopping, they said, why don't we invite all of our stores plus our employees to participate in active outdoor, rather than
Yeah, they gave
shopping.
everybody the day off.
They
right?
gave everybody the day
Yeah.
off, and they invited.
They said go outside, don't go shopping.
They invited their. So that's a very integrated approach where a company took a step related to let's change the thinking a little bit, and let's take the activity outside. And invite your business, your customers and consumers, and to sort of engage together around being active outside. And I think that also after they did that also increased sales. So there's some examples of brands, but also sectors are working together to come up with some collective ways to deal with these larger issues.
I'm curious, how much time do you guys spend thinking about the premium that consumers will pay for sustainability? Because some of these being more sustainable perhaps is more expensive in some cases not. Some things you can do pretty simply, but in some cases it does involve investing. How much is the consumer really willing to pay more for sustainability? What premium is there for that?
Well, I first of all ask, what's the cost per wear? So you're buying something, how many times are you going to wear it? And if you are buying something that's cheap, how many times are you going to wear it before?
But are people really thinking that way?
Well, there's a lot of education that's happening in that field with Fashion Revolution, for instance. Cost per wear is something that's been shared I don't know how many million times. Every Earth Week, there is Fashion Revolution Week, and it's to commemorate the Rana Plaza collapse. And it's a very big education initiative that's being championed in the UK. It's where it started, but now it's in 84 countries. And I always ask what's the cost per wear, but in fact, sustainability and cost is not necessarily
at odds with one another.
At odds with each other. There are so many brands that are very affordable, very much affordable, that are being made in America or made in the Americas or being made in Vietnam in very sustainable ways. Even made in China does not mean made badly. So it's about understanding what is it that you're purchasing. And sustainability and, again, accessibility, like I was saying, goes hand in hand. Like the more accessible, the more sustainable it is.
Yeah, I would just add, we don't really think about it in terms of a premium on the price that customers are willing to pay, because that's not the only reason to invest in it, right? It has value to the stakeholders I was talking about. It's an amazing tool for employee engagement and retention. Many of these investments have positive payoffs, particularly on the operational side. There's a huge amount that companies can do that will reduce the cost of whatever they're putting up front over the course of the lifetime of that investment. So
you work at a unique company, though. A lot of other companies will demand that someone like you tell them, what's the ROI on this? How are we going to save money? That's a real conversation that happens.
Yeah, and we do demand, just to be clear,
Results.
we are looking at ROIs on things. I guess it's the ways in which we're measuring them that are somewhat different. We're looking more holistically.
So can you give me an example of like maybe, because I know that you deal a lot with the actual physical space that your employees
Sure.
are in, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so Etsy has several goals that are around the sustainability of our offices and our data center operations, right? So we target to be completely zero waste, to run completely on renewable energy, and to reduce our energy consumption by 25%, right? So just in that space, there are
20%, 25% over how long?
25% by,
But it's like 10 years or whatever.
I believe it's by 2025 with a 2016 baseline. I hope.
I won't quote you on that, don't worry.
Thanks. Anyway, the point is, there's a huge number of investments that we were making that pay for themselves, right? Literally, it costs money to haul trash, right? So the more that you can divert to other categories, the lower your trash bill is going to be. LED light bulbs are one of the quickest ROI investments that anyone can make. And then when you factor in things like employee engagement and retention, it's not cheap to recruit talent. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. And so keeping employees engaged by beautiful workspaces, by values that they care about is a worthwhile investment.
Great. I see the mic is ready back there. Do you want me to take questions from this or the audience? Why don't we open up to you guys first? Anybody have any questions? Yes.
Thanks for raising these topics. Question on footprint. Has any industry been honest about truly mapping its end-to-end footprint? I saw a circular economy slide. And who's doing that, and what are some examples of it? How can we look at them? Thanks. It's not carbon, but just water and everything else.
It's a good question.
G-Star, the Dutch company G-Star Raw, has been since 2013 very transparent on their footprint. In fact, on their website, you can trace their factories. You can since 2013, so it's been a long time before even it reached Everlane or Everlane was ever conceived. So G-Star Raw is a great company to look at how they are displaying their footprint, their initiatives. They have a third party assessing everything. There's also, of course, Reformation that's, I think, made it very popular. And under every garment, you see exactly what is it that you are, saving, in fact, by using, dead stock. That's their thing. Good On You also has developed, like I said, the app Good On You has developed a way to looking at how they are translating these things on a consumer-facing level.
Who else? Anyone else? No questions? This is free advice here. Some people pay for this. Go ahead.
Thanks. I work in finance, and I actually had a meeting today trying to convince my company that we need to reallocate funds and try to invest in sustainable companies. And I'm having a very hard time making the business case defining what are sustainable companies, let's say in Chicago. And I gave them the sustainability goals, of course, and I was thinking maybe hit 3 of them or be focused on 3 of them, but I still want to be more definitive in what we're looking for.
This goes back to the definition question that we started with. It's very hard to quantify it and describe it.
So one thing when we were talking about labeling, right? Like I was not thinking so much about the label that's on the product that you're purchasing, but disclosure more generally. And it's so frustrating to me to sit at sustainability conferences and hear constant debate about which disclosure mechanism to use. Do we use SASB? Do we use GRI? Do we use integrated reporting, CDP, right? How are investors...
You just threw a lot of jargon out there. What are those things?
Those are all different mechanisms that companies can use to basically share data on their social, economic, and environmental and governance footprints, right? And I think kind of the gold standard is to ultimately integrate them alongside your financial results so that investors can make informed decisions. But there isn't a gold standard of what metrics to use. and it makes it very difficult for investors. So when you mentioned Larry Fink's letter, for those of you who aren't familiar, Larry Fink wrote a letter that basically encouraged companies to start disclosing more, to basically prioritize environmental, social, and governance factors in investing. My hope is that the outcome of that is a shared standard and more investment banks and firms actually focusing on this.
Yeah, I don't know which financial company you work for, but there's no one place to go to where this third party assesses, here are the top 10 most sustainable companies, or here are the top 10 most sustainable partners or service providers. And I think that's a problem. But are there any groups that try and measure and rate and dissect and
there are
scrutinize?
There's a lot of these.
I'm not talking about the environmental groups that many people, if you bring them into a finance conversation and it's not the right crowd,
the UN
it's not
Global
gonna.
Compact. The UN Global Compact has a great. If you want to look at them, they work with the companies. They work in the private sector. They have defined a way to measure progress, and they are pushing companies to follow their own. Measuring tools. I am part of the Global Compact, but I'm not too familiar for larger companies. But if you want to look into it,
the biggest. There's been a lot of going to that. How do you harmonize and all that? But one of the major big changes has been this task force on financial disclosure, which is financial accounting standards boards, and it's giving very specific mandatory guidelines on how you disclose climate, environmental impact, even all the way to supply chain. And that's becoming almost legislated. I referenced the principles for responsible investment, but in fact, in the EU, there's actually by 2022, it could be EU Parliament, they had a review from their Economic Social Committee that they're going to require that if you publicly list that you use the Task Force on Climate Disclosure, which is a very specific guidance on your governance, your strategy, your metrics, and your risk. Risk is a huge, huge thing, which really has changed the game quite a lot because sustainability is risk and management and mitigation of risk. And if you're not doing that, you're going to be caught up, whether it's legislative or your investors. And so that task force on climate disclosure has been huge. The other big one is CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project. They evaluate certain clients are requiring you to submit to the CDP and submit a questionnaire, and that you get a rate and a scorecard. So those are. And then MSC, there's a couple, these are what people use, but those are the ones that are most used. The CDP, EcoVadis is an overall sustainability rater, and then this TCFD. Those are three things that have really evolved, which are going to mandate if you're in the investor-led, owner asset manager, you're going to be required to report on this. Well, if you're a PRI signatory by 2020, and by 2022, the EU Parliament is going to require people that list publicly, to disclose their climate risk. So that's around the corner. So, and even we're a private company, we're looking to TCFD because we anticipate that's going to be a question going forward from clients or governments on what we're doing. So whether you're private or public, these things are sort of coming to really the main stage here, where now it's really, you must be involved in these areas or you're going to fall behind your competitors in a lot of ways.
We have one question from social, from a person who obviously wants to be part of pushing for sustainability, and they're asking how can they push their favorite brands to innovate and become more sustainable. You guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we get this question a lot as I work closely with consumers. Again, I list all the time, Fashion Revolution has a great campaign that's a week long that offers a lot of tools for people, citizens, to engage with their brands. There's also, brands are listening more and more to what consumers want, and they have all sorts of channels, whether it's on their Instagram, on their Twitter, on their Facebook. They are monitoring very closely what people are saying about them. If you have the power to write an op-ed, if you have the power to organize, brands are listening, and yeah.
Yeah, because it would be interesting to know like what gets the attention of the C-suite. Like someone tweeting at a company is not going to get the attention of the decision makers at the company. But maybe like, I don't know if there's been organized social media campaigns where it's like day after day, you've got an organized group sort of like tweeting at you. And
calling brands out works very efficiently. Actually, we're starting with a hashtag and organizing around calling brands out. We've seen it for Burberry's when.
Wait, what is that? I'm sorry.
Calling the brands
calling
out.
the brands
yeah,
out.
calling
Sorry.
out
Yeah.
somebody,
Okay.
calling the brands
Yeah.
out. Like we've seen it for Burberry's when the news broke out that they are burning their overstock, and the internet organized, and they were very, very effective in communicating their messages. I think organizing and creating a campaign around what you believe in. Like let's say, for example, Glossier, the fresh
Cosmetic company,
the
yeah.
cosmetic company are using. Or we're using, I think now it's changing, a glitter that's plastic-based, that's microfibers, plastic-based, it's not bio-glitter. And a campaign was started in calling them in the sustainable movement. I started it. And, and now they are looking into bio-glitter, and they are looking into less plastic into their production and supply chain.
We have another interesting question on social. How is gender equality integral to sustainability? Is it even a discussion?
Gender equality?
Yeah. Is it a discussion that you guys deal with?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge within the tech industry, particularly from an employment standpoint. Diversity and inclusion is like the buzzword in tech recruiting and employee engagement now. What you see is a huge discrepancy in the number of females at tech companies generally, within the engineering department specifically, and broadly beyond tech. I think everyone is well aware of the big discrepancy in pay. So it's certainly something that we're looking at. It's something that we're disclosing. We give detailed information on our employee population by gender. So yeah, it's very much on our radar.
Yeah, diversity and inclusion is a huge issue. It's important. Certain clients even are wanting to know how diverse your workforce is, or it's being legislated. Like even in the state of Illinois, there was a conversation about a state bill to require certain number of female board members. There's the whole UK gender pay. That was a requirement by law. Even I read something recently, there's now even mutual funds, on diversity and inclusion that are happening. So I would say diversity and inclusion is a huge issue across the board, whether it's, trying to diversify your talent base, but also whether it's going to be legislated as well too. I think in the country of France has even legislated that it's required that you have at least one or two female board members. A country law. So that's something.
France, we could do. If France could do it, we could do it.
I mean, but that's just and the state of Illinois. I meant so that's happening as well. And then Edelman itself, we have a goal, to achieve 50% women in leadership by 2020. So companies themselves are taking action on these issues too.
Yeah, it still feels like a nice to have and not like a critical need to have.
Well, the UN.
But I guess that's how it ties into sustainability, right?
UN Women has recently had a very big conference at the UN, in fact, in the ECOSOC chambers, and there were a lot of stats. I know you don't like stats so much, but there were a lot of stats that, in fact, if we don't have at the C-suite level women and women of color in particularly, it's not just about, let's have diversity and inclusion for the look of it. It's in fact impacting numbers and impacting their GDP and impacting how a company is more likely to succeed or not because of the relevancy that women can bring to the table, specifically if it is a company that is selling to women, and No, there's a lot of stats. I'm not going to bring them to you now.
No, you can. It's you know what I'm talking about. There's some. I love statistics. I numbers. I'm just saying they can be manipulated, and sometimes in surveys, if you ask a question a certain way, it evokes a certain response, and you can manipulate a lot of that. Go ahead in the back there.
Yeah, I have a follow-up point on that gender equality in healthcare, gender equality and sustainability. Project Drawdown, which is a pretty exhaustive list of climate strategies, 100 climate strategies, weighted by the amount of carbon that they would remove from the atmosphere, listed educating girls worldwide to the same age and extent as we educate boys as the sixth most successful strategy on that list, removing over 50 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent from the atmosphere by 2050. That's arising out of less poverty, delayed marriage, greater education means greater contribution to local economies. That impact alone is a remarkable strategy. So there's absolutely a gender component into climate change.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks for that.
That's great.
We talked a lot about the role of consumers, a lot about the role of companies and how stakeholders are playing into all this. But does government have a role here? I mean, should we be legislating or creating laws that mandate
Absolutely, we should
and punish companies for not being sustainable? I mean, should there be, there's lots of different proposals out there on carbon taxes and whatnot, but, what is the role of government and how do you think industry would react to that? Because my sense is they probably lobby against it.
One of the things I'm thinking about is like in our current political environment, there was this feeling that of despair, of loss, that there would be no regulation that kept climate change at bay. And you have seen a lot of state legislatures taking the lead on this, or city legislatures. So New York City, San Francisco, California generally. And at least
they've committed to adhering to the Paris Climate Accord.
Exactly.
Right?
And it does have an impact on companies because they're absolutely forced to comply. And when you're taking the steps for one location, it's that much easier to take it for the other. It becomes part of the case for doing it. So I don't know. On a personal level, of course, I think there's absolutely a role for regulation and for governments to influence and impact these decisions. I think, will companies push back? It depends on the issue and how material it is to their business. And again, the view that they take on what stakeholders they serve.
I mean, definitely governments play a role. I mean, globally, as well as like recently, the House bill passed the Climate Act now, which is going to require, the U.S. to comply with the Paris Agreement. Within India, there's a CSR 2% law, which requires, 2% of your profits to be given back to the societal organization, education, agriculture, whatever. States, are stepping up as well. And the way, because if you operate globally, what's happening now at the federal level, I mean, globally, if you operate globally, countries globally are taking action, whether it's the EU Parliament on the non-financial reporting directive. There's a lot of legislation that's coming down. So it's important. Government has an important role, and it's moving forward. And I anticipate, like, who would have, one of the questions in an earlier panel, several years ago, will there ever be a carbon tax? And like you said, there's something like at least 60 countries now around the world that have carbon tax. And in fact, there's a legislation that's being discussed in the US Congress. So I think government is taking a role.
Great. And we have just hit the 0-0 mark. So thank you all for making time. And thank you guys for coming. Thanks, guys.